Thank you, Rihanna. Thank you to SIA, and thanks to all of you guys for spending your time with us this whole week. As Rihanna mentioned, I'm Nick Mehta, CEO of a company called Gainsight, and I'm really lucky. I'm lucky in a lot of ways. So hopefully you guys are lucky in your lives. One of the ways I'm lucky is I get to spend my days talking to CEOs and chief customer officers at a lot of large technology and other B2B companies. And my objective in today's presentation is to share some of what I'm learning about how companies are adjusting to the changing business model in B2B and focusing on something that we call customer success. And we're going to talk more about that. So with that, I'm going to dive in. So I found this photo on the web. Gotta love Google Images. This guy definitely thinks he's found success. He probably just saved a customer, I think. So we're going to talk about customer success. How many of you guys have either customer success departments or know what customer success is? So what I'm going to try to spend time on is trying to share what we're hearing from our customers about how they think about success, why they do it, kind of what it means, how to measure it, things like that. So specifically, I'm going to cover a couple topics. So number one, why people are focused on customer success. I'm going to go through that quickly because I think most of you know what's driving this trend, but I'll at least put it in my words. Number two, how are people defining it? Because one thing I found is it means different things at every company. Some companies have renamed customer support to be customer success. For some companies, it's about driving revenue. For others, it's about customer satisfaction. I'm going to share with you some of what we've learned about that. And then finally, what we've learned about how people are driving customer success, and more practically, how people should avoid, things people should avoid in doing customer success. What are the mistakes people made in implementing customer success programs in their companies? So those are the three things we'll cover today. So let's start with why. Like, why am I here? I just recently took this job at this company that's in this industry. Why did I take the job? I think there's three big trends that are making customer success go from a nice idea and concept to something that's vital for businesses. Number one is what we call digital footprint. So every company, every B2B company, and obviously B2C companies as well, have tons of data about their customers now. They don't necessarily have it all in one place or know how to use it, but the data exists. So in the B2C world, we're all familiar with Facebook tracking everything we do, and cookies and ad networks and sensors and biofeedback. But in the B2B world, companies have a lot more data about their customers than they realize. So they obviously have data in CRM systems about what customers are buying. They might have data in their online product about how customers are using their service, what features they're using. There's data on the web about what their customers are saying about them, obviously in social media. There's data on LinkedIn about whether their customers are joining their companies or leaving their companies. There's data about what they're doing with your support organization, whether they're paying their bills on time. There's a ton of data. And really, many companies have this data. They haven't necessarily made sense of the data, so it's a lot of noise. But companies have data they need to leverage. And that's the number one trend we think that's driving customer success is this predominance of data. And it's not just for what you think of as SaaS companies. Obviously, SaaS companies have lots of data about their customers, about how they use their online product and when they log in. But any B2B company now has data. An advertising technology company knows when people are clicking on ads and what they're clicking on. A financial services company knows what products are working for customers and which ones aren't. GE, as many of you saw, is building sensors into aircraft engines to send data back to GE about aircraft engine performance. So the amount of data people have about their customers is only growing. I think that's kind of obvious. Number two is obviously the now cliche big data technology term. Big data is a reality. There's technology out there to process this huge amounts of data. And it's not about big data technology, but it's about what you can do with it. And we think there's some big applications for big data technology in the customer success area. Most importantly, what drives this trend? Number three, business models are changing. So the old software business model, which worked great for vendors at least, was you sell something and it doesn't matter whether the customer uses it, you get paid. Obviously, SaaS is all about paying as you go, paying per year, per month, et cetera. The old computing and hardware model was you buy a server, whether or not you rack and stack it, you pay for it. Now you obviously pay companies like Amazon as you use your computing. The old advertising model was you buy a Super Bowl ad on NBC or ABC or CBS and they're all great, but you have no idea whether it does anything. And now obviously you can buy ads on Google, you can do real-time bidding, you can follow people around the web, you pay based on performance. What's the common theme? So the common theme is it's much easier for a customer to try out your service because there's no barrier to entry. At the worst, they can try it out, leave after a month, leave after a year. You can do Google AdWords today, turn them off tomorrow. You pay based on clicks, right? What's the flip side of that coin? It's much easier for customers to leave. And that's the change in business model, right? We have lowered the barrier for people to become customers, which is awesome. And we've lowered the barrier for people to leave as customers and go to your competitor. And that is what's driving the need for customer success, as we'll talk about. And this, I think, applies to almost every business out there. The friction is dropping on both sides. What that means is that in the old world, vendor success and customer success were two different things. In fact, I would argue customer success was what CEOs said in speeches and cocktail parties to make them sound like they cared about their customers. And maybe they did, but their business model didn't depend on their customers being successful. The new model is you're totally intertwined. You will not make money unless your customers are successful. Now, that's not today, but in the next 5 years, businesses will not make money unless their customers get value because of the friction dropping. And we think that this is no longer a nice thing to focus on. This is a vital part of your business model. And so that's really what's driving this trend today. Now, let's talk about what. So what can you do to implement customer success? What does customer success mean? And here we can kind of have a good discussion about what we've seen in customers. So number one way to think about customer success is to think about your classic revenue funnel, right? So everyone's got a revenue funnel. You've got some chart on the wall that shows the number of leads you've got. You probably track it through some system, marketing automation. You look at where people are coming from. You have sales team that manages leads through an opportunity phase. You'll figure out when customers are going to go from prospects to clients. But for many, many companies, they have not thought about the strategic importance of customer retention. So in many companies, customer retention is almost a gimme. Hey, if we get the customers in the door, most of them will say we'll keep 95% of them. And we think that's the wrong way to think about things. We think that if you think of customer retention as a gimme, you're going to lose customers that you didn't realize. You're going to miss out on upsell as well. And you're going to end up throwing bodies at you. You're going to have lots of account managers that call customers, check in on how they're doing. And we think that there's just not the right way to do things. So what we found is there's a new way to think about your revenue funnel, where you really have 3 stages. You've got marketing, which is critical, and you automate it, and you instrument it, and use data. You've got sales, which obviously everyone knows and understands and continues to get better. And you've got retention or success. And we think that those are 3 equally important parts of a business. The bottom doesn't have to be a cost center. Honestly, a lot of companies, the reality is they look at support and client services and customer success as a cost center. I was just talking to a gentleman about this before. But that's a revenue center. And in fact, if you do it right, you'll drive as much revenue from the bottom of that funnel as you do from the top. And so we think that customer success isn't something you do to just make your customers happy and make you feel good about yourself. It's actually something you do to drive revenue. And it's very important, I think, to put in those terms, because honestly, as a CEO, you want to make your customers happy, but you have to do everything in the context of how it actually drives shareholder value. And if you can't align your customer success activities to shareholder value, you've got a problem. And so we think that thinking about customer success as part of your revenue funnel is very important. For many companies, what that means is over time as you grow, that existing base becomes more of your revenue than your new business. For any mature company, your existing customers are where your revenue comes from. And think of it strategically becomes a big part of how you value your success. And one way to figure out whether you're there is look around the management team in the company. And if you had to stack rank how strategic each person is, your VP of marketing, your VP of sales, VP of products, you've got a VP of customer success or client services, where do they rank? Are they strategic? Are they part of your business model, or are they a cost center? And I think that's how you figure out whether you're there or not. When we think about this, we think part of this is an organizational model. So a lot of companies are taking this concept and then creating an organization. They might call the person a chief customer officer. They might call them a VP of customer success. But the idea is there's a team that's focused on post-sale, customer getting value, and the vendor making more money from that customer over time, and not focused on getting new logos. But it's not just an organization. We think it's an attitude. It's really thinking about the whole life cycle of your company and your customers, and how do you make sure that through that life cycle, from when they come on board to as they kind of get engaged and use your service, throughout the whole process, they feel like they're getting success. We like to break this down into a few concepts. When I talk to customer success officers or chief customer officers, I've heard 5 themes of what they like to measure customer success. So number one's obvious, it's retention. So everyone measures retention. If you're a recurring revenue business, you look at churn. Not everyone measures it correctly, so there's some math to how you do the calculations. But I think most people in the room understand you have to measure retention. That's pretty obvious. But in a way, retention is too late, right? So if you find out about a customer that's leaving and they tell you they're leaving, what can you do about it? I mean, how many of you have gotten a call from a customer that says they're leaving and then you try to scramble to save them, right? That's very common and it's really too late. So think about just retention, we think is only a small part of the problem. How do you think about adoption? So what do you do to make sure that through the life cycle with your customer that they're getting more and more value? More people in your customer are using your service. They're using more of your service and they're getting more value from your service. That's adoption. How do you measure influence? When I say influence, I mean when you sell to a customer, is there one person, that customer, who loves you and everyone else is kind of ambivalent? Or are there 100 people that love you, you know? Because honestly, if you've got one supporter in a customer and that person leaves, you're kind of in trouble, right? So how do you measure the influence in an account? How many relationships you have? How many advocates you have? Satisfaction, which is again kind of, I think for many people, motherhood and apple pie. How do you measure your net promoter score or other ways to tell whether customers are happy? And then the last one, which I see a lot of people doing now, is tracking engagement. So is that customer speaking at your webinar? Are they at your conference? Are they doing references for you? If they're doing those things, they're very likely to stay with you over time. So the way we like to think about things is it's really the whole cycle, and that's what customer success is. And it's, we put it into a cheesy acronym of RAISE. And honestly, if a customer officer does this, they should get a raise because this is driving value for a company. And so it's not just about retention. It's not just about avoiding churn. It's the whole life cycle of a customer and kind of maximizing that. So how and how not should you implement these? So I've got some thoughts on mistakes that I see people make, and then we'll turn it over to questions. So what I call the 7 customer success fails. So hopefully if anyone's done any of these, you're not offended. So I'm going on a limb here and talking about these. So number 1, I think this one's pretty obvious. No buy-in. So some companies see other peers having a customer success team, and they relabel somebody to be customer success. My VP of customer success, my director. But it's not really part of the strategy. They're not thinking about it holistically. The CEO's not bought into it. Or they basically come out and say, we all care about customer success. We all love our customers. It's just a big love fest, but nobody owns it. How many companies could get by with nobody owning sales? So could you imagine a company where there's no head of sales? I couldn't imagine it. I don't know how that would happen, how that would work. Maybe it works for some companies. Similarly, if there's no owner and there's no buy-in, we don't think it'll be successful. So you really have to have somebody that is responsible for this. Number 2, relabeling, kind of sticking a new label on an old concept, right? So some companies, what they've done is they've said, here's Bob or Sue used to be my support person. They're now my customer success person. And they haven't changed anything about what they do day to day. We don't have new systems, no new processes, but they're focused on customer success. And that's fine. It's good marketing. It doesn't really do anything for you. You really got to rethink what the job means, what the processes are, what the tools are, things like that. Number 3, giving customer success people individual quotas. So CSM stands for Customer Success Manager. That's often the job title. If you think they're just a sales rep and you say, great, we've got the new business sales team that brings in new business, and we've got the customer success team that's going to drive renewals and upsells, and we're going to measure them just on dollars. You know what that person is? That person's a salesperson. Nothing wrong with salespeople. I love salespeople. But that person's not going to be looked at by the customer as an advocate. Because that person's going to have to go to the customer and ask for an order, which is honestly very different than trying to drive customer success. So just giving a CSM a quota and saying go is not the right way to approach things. You really need to look at those 5 dimensions I talked about, RAISE, retention, adoption, et cetera, and measure them holistically, not just around how much revenue they drive. Number 4, at the flip side, it can't just be a big love fest. The customer success team can't just be about customer sat. You have to measure them as a team on how it's impacting the business. So I wouldn't give an individual CSM a quota, but I would give the VP of customer success a target on retention, churn, upsell, et cetera. Because otherwise, when you're doing the budget for next year, and the CSM VP says, I need 5 or 10 more people, how are you going to justify it? You need to think about your business model in terms of how this ties to revenue. And the best way to think about this is every one of you, if you run a company, has a spreadsheet that has revenue, number of reps, quota per rep, how much revenue is going to be driven. And you need to have some similar model that says, here's how customer success is going to drive retention. If you haven't done that, the program's going to fail. It won't scale over time. Number 5, treating all customers the same. So each one of your businesses probably sells to different types of customers. Workday is a great example of a company that has a very small number of customers, but they pay them a ton of money, right? A few hundred customers, paying them hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Amazing business, right? On the flip side, you've got someone like Google that'll have millions of customers, and many of them pay them a small amount of money. They're not all the same, and you can't treat them the same, which means that customer success for a business that sells to SMBs is probably going to be more automated, more data-driven, really going to be more about finding cohorts of people, reaching out to them based on email, in-app messaging, basically intervening without people. Whereas at the high end of that pyramid, it's really about giving that account manager the data they need to have a great meeting with the customer and making sure that they're going to go into that customer and really impress them and make them want to stay with you over time. When I talk to businesses at the top of this pyramid, they often don't have a churn problem, right? Companies like Workday honestly don't have a churn problem per se. What they do have is they want to improve client engagement, drive more upsell. So that's different than at the bottom of the pyramid where you literally have thousands of customers. You're just trying to figure out which ones are happy and which ones aren't. Don't treat them all the same. Number 6, this is probably one of the biggest ones. I should have put it up front. Don't start at the renewal. Don't call a customer 30 days before the renewal and say, hey, we really cared about you. We really care about your business. We haven't talked to you for 11 months, but we really care about what you do. How are you doing? And by the way, can we get that renewal purchase order, right? And by the way, that happens a lot. That doesn't work, because what ends up happening is either you're going to get the renewal because the customer is already happy or they're stuck or whatever, which is honestly, that's a gimme. You should just do that online. Or the customer tells you a bunch of stuff and it's too late. It's way too late. You've got to intervene earlier. You got to figure out when to intervene so that you're there when the customer's having the problem, not when they've decided to switch. And number 7, last one, missing the full view of the customer. So many of our customers and the people we talk to, they care about all this stuff. Look, everyone in this room cares about this stuff. There's no lack of desire. But they've got data in all these different places, and they've got teams that are surveying customers, and they've got folks tracking product usage, and they've got people calling customers, and they just don't have the full view. And every one of those people is like the blind people trying to find the elephant, right, in that story kind of from the past. Every one of them sort of has a small piece of the picture. Nobody understands it fully. And this isn't about technology, honestly. This is about process. This is about getting your team together to really understand the customer holistically. So those are the 7 mistakes I think a lot of companies make. Nobody should be ashamed of them. They're very common. But we think that by addressing those, we're going to take the whole industry to another level. So last thing I have on us, we basically are a vendor in this space, obviously. So we sell technology to help people drive customer success. All of us come from backgrounds running large software as a service companies. I ran a company called Live Office that was sold to Symantec about a year ago. We're very passionate about this area. Our investors are passionate. We're super fortunate to partner with some really good early customers that you can see there. And I have about 5 minutes for questions, so I'll turn it over to you. So who wants to ask first? Great. Yeah. Because sometimes it's very fuzzy. Totally. It's different for everybody. I mean, look, as a vendor, we live that problem, right? Because we're trying to convince people to buy our technology, so totally. What we found is that a lot of it is how does the CEO, especially if it's a smaller company or maybe the CFO or senior executives, how do they think about customer success? So there's a little bit of like, where do they sit at the table? I mean, if you think of the analogy of the table and the executive meeting, where's that customer success leader sit? So some of it is honestly not just financial. It's about, I hate to say that it's about resetting strategy and expectations, but part of it's that. Part of it is looking at the pain point. So for some businesses, the pain point is churn, right? So especially when you sell to small companies, you have inevitably churn as people leave and go out of business and things like that. Some people, it's not churn though. It's about customer engagement. It's about doing bigger deals, driving bigger renewals. So I think putting it in the terms that they understand, which obviously if you work in a company, you could do that pretty easily. I think partnering up with the CFO. So even if you want to eventually get to the CEO, if you're in a company, you're in a customer success manager, you want your CEO to buy in, you've got to get the CFO to buy in. Honestly, I'm a CEO. Lots of times we make the CFO the bad guy, right? Or bad girl, right? The person that's going to go say no. So in addition to convincing your CEO that this is important, convince your CFO. And what that means is sit down with the spreadsheet. And here's the spreadsheet most people operate under today. Revenue, existing revenue, new bookings, and there's this line called churn or retention, right? And people just assume that 95% of people are going to stay without any effort, right? And it's just going to happen, right? And if your business makes all your customers stay without any effort, awesome, and I want to invest in your business, right? But if your business depends on people doing things to get your customers to stay and making them happy, there's real ROI there. But you need your CFO to understand it, because I think most CFOs today don't fully grasp what's needed to drive retention. Next question. Phil. Okay.
So how do you measure customer
How do you measure customer happiness?
happiness?
How do I measure my own happiness? I don't think this is actually, it's a very good question. I think there's a lot of good research on happiness and some of the misconceptions you can get try to measure happiness. I would actually say customer happiness might be the wrong thing to measure, to be honest. As a business, you can measure satisfaction. Obviously, there's Net Promoter Score, which there's pros and cons to it, but I think there's enough research that says it's pretty good that I think it's worth using. You can look at engagement. You can look at your retention rates, all the different metrics I talked about. You can come up with an engagement score. But I think, honestly, saying customer happiness is the wrong thing. And I hate to be controversial, but it's not just about making your customers happy. It's about making your business money, right? So I think one of the mistakes, going back to your point previously, customer success people make is make their job about customer happiness. That's good to say on the outside, but you need your CEO or CFO to see how it drives revenue and financial results as well. So I think there are ways to measure customer sat specifically, and you want people to be big advocates, and you want them speaking at your conferences and to be big promoters of you, but you also want that to drive financial results. So I would say that it's you want to measure something different than happiness. I like happiness. I just don't think that it's the only thing, so. Yeah. What we've found is that people create kind of customer engagement or customer sat scores that are a mix of the things I talked about. So how widespread is the usage of that product or service? What features are they using? Are they speaking at your conferences? Are they advocates for you? What's the recent Net Promoter Score? And then what we find a lot of people do is use a combination of intuition and statistics to figure out which of those variables matter for their business. So let me give you an example. It matters a lot that people like your stuff, whatever you sell. But there's certain people in your customers that matter more. So in some businesses, if it's a decision made by a VP, honestly, the VP's happiness matters a lot more than the users. I hate, that might not be good or the right thing long term, but it is what it is, right? So you have to figure out that formula. A lot of our customers do customer health scores or other metrics like that, and they weight the different variables based on their business. And then they use statistics and what some people call predictive analytics to figure out what variables they should be looking at. And every business is actually different. There's actually no common thing that everyone looks at. Net Promoter might be the closest, but even that I don't think is common enough that everyone should just look at it.
Does sentiment analysis play into this at all? Because operational enough that you use that or
I think so. I mean, it's so that you can do sentiment analysis, which for those of you that don't know what it is, it's analyzing text to look at how positive or negative the text is. Like if I say great versus that sucks, those are positive and negative. People are doing it now to analyze community data, social media data, and survey feedback, and sometimes help desk emails. So I think it does matter. What you have to do, though, is make sure you understand who those people are. Again, if the person that's saying stuff negatively about you doesn't really have any influence in the decision, it's important to make them happy, but it may not weight as much in the customer score. Probably coming up, maybe one last question, Anthony?
So going to the other side of ROIs, you talked about the revenue return side, but on the investment side, from your experience, you're working with your customers,
Yeah, it's a good question. So if you said like companies, for every dollar of new revenue you want to bring in, companies invest often like $1 of sales and marketing, or sometimes $2, or sometimes $5 in sales and marketing, right? It shouldn't be the same ratio, because clearly it should be easier to keep a customer than it is to get a new customer, right? But it shouldn't be zero. So what we've found is people might invest 10 cents for every dollar of revenue, or 20 cents, or 30 cents. And it depends on how sticky your product is. The more sticky, the less you have to invest. But it shouldn't be $1, right, per revenue, but it shouldn't be, it shouldn't be like, 0 or 1 penny or whatever. There's definitely something in that 10% type range that seems to be pretty common. Great. I think we're up on time, so thank you very much, and thanks again to SIA. Appreciate it. Thanks.